We would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands on which we meet to share these conversations on the Vegan Compass podcast.
We extend our respect to elders past and present, as well as any of our listeners and guests. Hello and welcome to the Vegan Compass podcast, unveiling truths, inspiring change. We are your hosts, Ric Allport and Mackenzie Cross.
From wherever you're listening, please be sure to like and subscribe to support this podcast. Now to the episode.
Hello everybody, welcome to another episode of the Vegan Compass podcast. We're your hosts, Ric Allport and Mackenzie Cross.
And yes, welcome again. And we are very honoured and we're very excited because we have Mr. Chris Delforce here with us today. So Chris, I'm going to start off with two questions. Who are you and what do you do?
Well, I'm Chris Delforce. I'm the founding director of Farm Transparency Project. This is an organisation that investigates and exposes commercial animal abuse across Australia. The idea is to force transparency on industries that are dependent on secrecy. So a lot of our work involves breaking the law. We trespass to get into farms and slaughterhouses and capture evidence of what animals are experiencing there in order to bring that to the public and educate consumers, I guess, so they can make informed decisions about whether this is an industry they want to support. And in our experience, it's not an industry they want to support. It's simple fact that people don't know what's happening, what they're paying for, the kind of cruelty that is inherent and day to day in these industries. It's just completely kept hidden from them. So our role is to reverse that.
Okay, so taking you back a little bit, how long have you been vegan? And then also, how did you become involved in becoming an undercover investigator? Like, that's an interesting little journey.
I've been vegan about 13 years and I was vegetarian for about 9 years before that. And when I went vegetarian, it was just an epiphany I had one night. I think I was 10 years old and it just occurred to me that animals probably didn't want to be eaten. It's probably not in their best interests. And I didn't really think much more about it for many years until I got to, late years in high school or university, and I started looking into the philosophy of it and learning more about the different ethical arguments and also learning about what actually happens in these places. But there was very little information available, very little footage and photos from Australian farms and slaughterhouses. I knew the movie Earthlings and I'd try to get my friends to watch that. And the thing I'd always hear was that that's America. It's different here in Australia. And there was no real way to prove that wrong because everyone just had this idea that things are somehow better here and that animal cruelty, if it happens, it's an isolated incident and it's quickly dealt with by authorities, and that the norm is that animals are treated and killed humanely. And I knew that wasn't the case, but I didn't know how to prove that. But I started a group called the Youth Vegetarian Association at my university, ANU in Canberra. I was only at university for a year. I started this group. I was still vegetarian at the time, and that caught the attention of Animal Liberation ACT. And a few of their members came along to my meetings and kind of befriended me and started very gently educating me as to why I should probably go vegan if I was going to be an advocate for animals. I didn't know the issues with eggs or dairy. And I think a lot of vegetarians don't know. A lot of people don't know that the male chicks are killed, the male calves are killed, and that the layers are killed at a fraction of their lifespan, as are the milking cows, the mothers. So I didn't know any of that, and once I learned it, it was, I guess pretty inevitable that I had to go vegan. And these friends of mine from Animal Liberation then started to trust me enough to take me out on rescues. So we started doing rescues from intensive turkey farms and also battery cage egg farms. And that it was a whole new world for me. And I wanted to see and learn more and more and more. I wanted to learn everything I could about these industries. And I was involved in a slaughterhouse investigation with Animal Liberation New South Wales. And that was how I got to learn about hidden cameras, how to install hidden cameras, basically. And back then the technology was these big DVRs, almost like a DVD player sized thing, that you'd have to hide somewhere with the cameras about this big, and you have these huge thick cables running between them. And the batteries, to get 1 day of footage, it was almost like half the size of a car battery.
Wow.
Unless you could find a PowerPoint you could plug into. So after we'd done that slaughterhouse investigation, we then found a piggery just outside of Canberra called Wally's Piggery. And we had the hidden camera equipment sent down to us and started investigating it, put in those hidden cameras and captured some pretty horrific things. And that led to this massive public outcry, really incredible media coverage across Australia and internationally as well. And that really showed me the value of investigations, because I'd started to wonder, what is the bigger purpose of doing all these rescues? We were saving hundreds of individual lives, but we weren't changing anything in the bigger picture. And I started really yearning for something bigger, and investigations became the way to do that, I guess, to try and change things by drawing attention to it.
Yeah, wow.
Thank you for sharing. We have a little distraction here.
We have a visitor in.
This is Puss in Boots. She's made her first podcast appearance, so you should feel very special, Chris.
Chris is a cat lover as well, so.
Yeah.
I've got a couple around. I'm sure they'll make an appearance at some point.
I did see a little tail in the background before. So there were a lot of investigations out of the UK in the 80s that really were about exposing animals used for medical experimentation. So I guess that kind of thing happens in Australia as well, but what motivated you to focus on animal agriculture rather than some of these other animal exploitation industries?
The main part of it is that animal agriculture is what I was exposed to. It's the opportunity that presented itself to me, and it just happened to be the path that I went down. But the other side of it is that this scientific experimentation side of things has always been a much more secure industry. I guess it's a lot harder to get into these places. You kind of have to be working in the field, because there's the security is just a whole other level compared to a farm where the doors are open, the windows are open, there's no alarm, security, anything. So partly it's because of the ease of it, I think, and the increased risks associated with doing lab kind of work, because I guess labs, even in Australia where there hasn't been much of a focus on them, I think that they have always been aware of the work of animal advocates overseas, and I guess they've been more prepared than animal agriculture has been.
Yeah, interesting.
So what does a typical investigation involve? What evidence are you aiming to gather?
It depends on the kind of place. So if it's a pig farm, usually we can we might drone it first to get some intel, I guess, to learn what it looks like, how we might get in, how we might get out, where we might put a lookout, that sort of thing. and try and figure out what happens in each shed. Sometimes it can be pretty obvious even from the sky what's going on where. And then we'll just want to, I guess, get footage. We usually try and focus on what the standard is, what the legal side of it. So what animals are going through that the law allows and that the industry says is okay. So in a pig farm, that's often looking at farrowing crates, because most or pretty much all intensive pig farms in Australia still use farrowing crates where the sows are confined. And we'll just want to get a good amount of handheld footage and photos showing what that looks like, and try and present it to the world in a way that says, really brings people there, I guess.
Well, it's interesting because I remember when I first met you, it was the first time I got to see Lucent. And I remember talking to you after, you'd screened some of the footage. And I said, man, that's really powerful. And then you said to me, just wait till you see what's coming up next. And of course, then Dominion broke. How long did it, and Dominion is seriously mind-blowing, and I think everybody needs to be watching Dominion to see what's going on. How long did it take you to gather all the footage for Dominion? Because that's a really intense documentary.
Well, it depends when you want to start counting. So I officially announced Dominion, started working on it in 2015, and then it was released in 2018, but it uses footage from earlier than 2015. It uses footage from the investigations I was doing for Lucent. It also has footage from other groups that were active in that time. But my main focus for those 2.5 years was on Dominion. So most of it was between 2015 and right up to the a few weeks before the premiere date in early 2018. We were still gathering footage and putting it together.
Wow. I went to the premiere in Sydney and the March afterwards, and it was a really incredibly powerful event. I think everyone in the cinema who saw that documentary was just bawling their eyes out at the kind of cruelty that is happening. But you and your team are witnessing this firsthand, not just when you're in there installing the surveillance equipment, but then also when you're editing the footage. So how do you manage the emotional toll of having to witness that firsthand?
The sad part of it is you get very desensitized to it, and you start seeing it from a purely objective perspective, where you're trying to find the clip that captures best what's happening, the clip that tells a particular story, I guess. You're trying to find a bit that's going to do the most justice to what's happening, and that means not really seeing them as individual animals anymore. You have to switch off to their suffering, because it's too much. You really have to view it from that objective lens, and that just comes naturally. I think the more that you expose yourself to that kind of footage, and it's a bit of a shock sometimes when I'll be watching something and think it's pretty tame, and then we'll show someone else who hasn't seen that kind of thing before, and they'll be completely horrified by it. And I'll think, I'm so far out of touch now with what is considered horrific, because I've seen too much. It helps these days that I have a really great team as well. So I'm watching a lot less of the footage than I used to be. Almost all of the footage we capture now, or in the past 1.5 years, has been viewed by other members of my team. So it's a lot less pressure on me, and the editing as well. They all do editing now. So there's a lot less of that I'm having to do, which is nice. But Yeah.
Well, moving on, because things, well, I don't know, things just don't seem to have changed that much. But how do you feel about the current state of animal agriculture and their transparency and accountability?
They're getting better at pretending to be transparent. The Australian pork industry, for example, they have virtual tours on their website. They even have a tour of a slaughterhouse, Diamond Valley Pork, here in Melbourne. And of course, they completely skip the part where pigs are inside the gas chamber. They have pigs in the race being led up to the chamber, and then they have pigs coming out the other side unconscious. And it's all happy music, and just completely skips over the part where they're screaming and thrashing, desperately fighting for their lives as they're suffocated by carbon dioxide. But then they're able to say, you know, we're so open, we have these interactive virtual tours on our site, which is one of the things that motivated us to go do our own virtual tours of slaughterhouses and pig farms and other kinds of facilities. I think that they are still doing a very good job of holding on to secrecy, and the government, state and federal governments, are still very much supporting them in that and bringing out new laws to try and criminalize the sort of work that we do in exposing it. I think we still have a long way to go. There's still a lot of misinformation. There's still a lot of ignorance out there about what's happening in these kinds of places.
Pardon me for coughing.
You're all right. So your investigations into the use of carbon dioxide gas chambers in pig slaughterhouses was instrumental in the Victorian parliamentary inquiry into pig welfare. So can you tell us a little bit more about this? I watched the parliamentary inquiry as it was unfolding, and it was incredibly infuriating. I'm sure you have a lot more to say on it.
Yeah, so the gas chambers issue has been a big one for me for 10 years. We first heard about it in late 2013. We heard about these gas chambers being used at the Corowa slaughterhouse in New South Wales, which at the time was the largest pig slaughterhouse in the Southern Hemisphere. And all that we could find about it was how it's the most humane method. Pigs just gently fall asleep. And we learned that this chamber has been in place. This was the first one built in the country, and it had been built in the early 90s, I think. So it had been around for over 20 years. And no one knew what it looked like inside. So we went and captured that footage. The first time in the world, captured what happens inside these chambers. And it was as horrific as you might expect it to be, or even worse. And we got some great media coverage and social media coverage as well. Animals Australia really helped push that out to millions and millions of people. And then we exposed several other gas chamber slaughterhouses just to show that this wasn't the case of one facility doing the wrong thing. This is how it's done. There's always this suffering in these chambers. I mean, in all slaughterhouses, but particularly in these gas chambers, because they have the gas set at such a high concentration, around 90%. So it's always going to be extremely aversive and painful. And fast forward 9 years, nothing had changed. Still the exact same chambers in use. Some of them had upgraded to much larger chambers. Instead of 3 pigs in a gondola every 30 seconds, it's up to 10 pigs. It's quite awful. So we wanted to, and a lot of people still didn't know about it. You talk to them and they think gas chambers. What do you mean? Even vegans and other activists didn't really know much about gas chambers still. And I thought this is there's a lot of potential in this issue to really use the industry's worst elements against them, because it's something that is so blatantly evil and wrong, and it's in a way is one of their biggest weaknesses. I think if we can show that this is how this is what they are calling humane. This is what they are calling the best way of doing it. Let's show what the best way looks like and how horrible it is, and make the point that anything else, any other method, must be worse by the industry's own admission. So we got footage inside 3 in Victoria, the 3 gas chamber slaughterhouses in Victoria. But we knew that there was the risk that media wouldn't really be interested because it wasn't really anything new, even though it had been quite some years since it had been exposed, and we had much better camera equipment now. We're recording in 4K a lot of the time now with the hidden cameras. So it was just a much higher quality view inside these horrible chambers. We wanted to do something that we knew would really hook the media. So that's when we realized that there was an opportunity to hide me inside the maintenance ceiling above one of these chambers while it was in operation, so that I could film it with a really high quality handheld camera and get photos as well. And that ended up being the thing that got us a major piece on ABC 730 and a follow-up piece as well. It led to the shutdown of that particular facility, and it was huge. It was bigger than we thought it could have been, and that led to the parliamentary inquiry into pig welfare, which was largely around the chambers. It was also around other issues that we'd been exposing for years, things like farrowing crates, things like sow stalls, which the industry had promised to phase out by 2017 and were acting as though they had, but they were still very much in use. So part of the inquiry was looking at that failed phase out, and that all came to some hearings in February this year, I think it was, where there was one day for pro-animal groups and one day for, well, maybe 2 days, I think, for industry and government groups who like killing pigs. And it was a great opportunity to kind of get on record a lot of these things that we've been investigating for the last 10 years. But yes, it was absolutely infuriating when it came to the industry's turn to just spout nonsense. I mean, that's all it was. Things like saying these pigs who are trapped indoors in intensive confinement will break down if they go outside. I mean, what is that? What the hell is that? Or saying that it would be worse for piglets to use pain relief on them when they're cutting their tails off, cutting chunks out of their ears, stripping back their teeth, because it would mean having to pick them up one extra time to inject them with the painkillers.
That was the thing that infuriated me the most when I was watching. It was an industry vet. It was an industry vet that was saying, oh, it's better to do this without anaesthetic rather than double handling them, which makes absolutely no sense.
No sense. And you have to wonder, do they genuinely believe this? Have they been so indoctrinated that they've just completely pushed science and logic out the window because their entire focus is on propping up this industry and making it seem as good as possible, or do they know that they're lying?
Well, this is where I start wondering about these humans. Is when did they lose their compassion? When did they lose their empathy for a living, breathing being? And they just see them as a commodity that they can do whatever the hell they want to them. It's absolutely mind blowing.
I think you just answered that. It's about making money.
Yeah.
I mean, I have friends who've done vet or animal science courses at university, and they're always struck by how cold and indifferent it is from the start, and how they really are trained to view these animals not with, there's movement in the background, not with any kind of compassion, but to purely view them as commodities, and it's all very industry focused. But the other thing with the way that I guess workers in these places as well treat them as just commodities, I think it's very similar to how I have felt having to watch that footage and becoming desensitized to it and not seeing them as individual animals. It's really a similar thing if you're working in these places. A lot of people don't go to a slaughterhouse for a job because they hate animals and they want to hurt animals. But any kind of compassion you might have is stripped away within a day or two, because there's just no way to do that kind of work with any compassion.
It's too hard to carry the weight of the emotion of what you're doing. It's easier to just turn it off.
Yeah, that's right.
So how do you respond? Of course, there's critics, and they don't like the methods that you get into to get this footage. How do you respond to the criticism about the methods used in getting the undercover footage?
I'd love to be shown another way to do this, to show people what's happening inside. The industry is never going to publish that themselves, and when they do, it's in the form of that virtual tour of Diamond Valley Pork, where they completely omit the main part of it. If we've always said, if slaughterhouses install their own CCTV in the kill floor and publish that on their website, a live stream for people to go on and watch if they want to learn for themselves, there's no reason for us to go in, trespass, and install our own cameras. What would be the point of that? But of course, they're never going to do that. So if they were actually genuinely transparent on their own, then I think there'd be much less of a need for us to do what we do and to use our methods. But at the moment, there's just such walls of secrecy that they hide behind. So what other choice do we have than to sneak behind those walls and film it? And I think I've always said, what's worse, jumping a fence to film animals being abused or the animal abuse itself? Surely most people would agree the animal abuse is the worst of those crimes.
Yeah, thank you for clarifying that, because I think, it's something that you've probably heard a lot, the criticisms, but I think that puts it pretty plainly into perspective. So as someone who has seen the absolute darkest horrors of these industries, is there something that you wish more people knew about the truth of what's happening behind the scenes here?
All of it. I mean, even just the nature of slaughterhouses and the fact that no animal is willingly walking to their death. They're not choosing to give up their life. It doesn't matter at the end of the day how well they were treated on the farm. Doesn't matter if it was an organic, ethical, local farm. Doesn't matter if there were 10 animals on that farm. They were given individual treatment when they had issues. They were given names. None of that matters if at the end of the day they're in a slaughterhouse and they don't want to die and they're fighting with every last breath to stay alive. Because that's the reality. There's always suffering and fear and pain in these places. And if you're buying animal products, if you're buying meat, dairy, eggs, there's always you're paying for suffering and you're paying for pain, even if it's promoted as this humane, ethical thing, because it's just that can never be the case. There's no way to do this humanely, and we've tried to show that through our Shut Down Slaughterhouses campaign, where we're investigating 30 slaughterhouses over 2 years, from the huge ones to the little local places. There's no difference for these animals. They are always it's always against their will, and it's always awful.
So how can our listeners support or get involved in the fight for transparency in these industries? What can they do to help?
Well, start with follow us on social media, jump on our email list as well, because from time to time we'll have events or we'll have calls to action. There's a number of calls to action on our website. For each of our campaigns, we try to have one or two, where it might be contacting the agriculture minister or some other figure and asking for something, basically. We have a campaign around the dairy industry, and one of the things we're trying to do is to get the dairy industries school program to be scrapped. And that's something that's up to individual schools to choose to not be a part of that. So if you have a child in a school where they have this Dairy Australia curriculum, talk to your school and get them to scrap that. But also just share our footage, share our photos. We don't want all this work to just bounce around the echo chamber. We need it to be reaching the people who are actually paying for this kind of thing to happen. So don't be afraid to share it on your socials, knowing that it's going to be seen by friends and family and colleagues who do pay for this kind of thing to happen. I think be prepared to have those uncomfortable conversations and don't be apologetic in standing up for these animals.
I think that is so cool that there's so many things that people can do to get involved. And something I'll talk to you about a little bit down the line, you mentioned you're getting rid of the dairy curriculum in schools. I'm now working with Vegan Australia and doing vegan education going into schools, so we can get that accurate information, the balance between what they've got in the school, because the meat and dairy stronghold in the schools is just horrendous. I'm blown away at how much that they're in the schools and in all the different subject areas. So with Vegan Australia, we're trying to counteract that, and we've only just started, but it's uncovering huge amounts of money behind the school curriculum. So yeah, I'll talk to you about that later.
Yeah, I was very glad to see that. I got the email from Vegan Australia, and I thought, yes, this is fantastic. This is what needs to happen. So very glad you're doing that.
And just a little announcement too, if there's any vegan teachers listening, Vegan Australia has created a new Facebook group as part of this program, the Vegan Teachers Network. So definitely search that group on Facebook and join to share resources.
Absolutely. Now, Chris, I know you've got you're so busy because you've had different court cases and different parliamentary hearings that you've been in, but are there any upcoming projects or campaigns for Farm Transparency Project?
Well, we're nearing the end of actually not quite nearing it, but getting towards the end of our Shutdown Slaughterhouses campaign. So we pledged to expose 30 over 2 years. We've published 19, and we're going to hit the 30. That is definite. I think over the next couple of months, we'll be releasing all of that. We'll be making some announcements around that pretty soon. So there's a lot more footage to come, and yeah, we need help in getting that out there. We certainly can't rely on mainstream media to give this the attention it deserves. There's the Victorian Parliamentary Inquiry. The government has to respond within 6 months, and that deadline is coming up pretty soon. I think around the 20th of December, they've said that they're going to announce their response to the report. So any last minute pressure that can be put on the Victorian government to do the right thing by pigs, that would be great. What else? There's something there's an event we're going to be running next year, but we haven't announced that yet. We'll be announcing that in probably in a week or so. So stay tuned for that. It'd be great to get a lot of people involved with that. So yeah, there's things in the works that I can't really talk about is the answer.
Well, I remember like I think I hosted about six screenings of Dominion. And then soon after that, of course, you had the huge Dominion march in Melbourne, and I flew down for that. And seriously, I can't thank you enough, for you and your team enough for doing that whole event. It was seriously one of the most moving, if not the most moving event I've ever taken part in. And to see the outpouring of support for you guys was incredible. So thank you so much for doing that. That opened up many people's eyes. So yeah, it was a very cool event.
Yeah, it was an amazing memory for me as well. Thank you for flying down. And we're trying to recapture that. The movement, I think, has taken a big hit since COVID. A lot of people and a lot of groups have kind of disappeared and sadly haven't come back. So we've, I think, really gone back about 10 years, I'd say, in the progress of this movement. So we're trying to do our part in bringing that back through events like marches and protests and vigils and investigations and campaigns. But we need everyone back on deck. We need to be reaching new people and really building ourselves up again, because we were a very formidable movement, I think. And
yeah, look, I agree. I've been going out and doing some more outreach, and the numbers are so low compared to what it was pre-COVID. So I reiterate that. Get out there. We need voices on the street. We need that power behind a combined, movement, because groups would work together. You might be having different focuses, but everyone would start coming together to push these big events. So we really need that to be happening again.
Yeah. I just wanted to say, Chris, to you and your team, thank you so much for the work that you do. We know it's not easy work. We know you cop a lot of criticism. And I think on behalf of the whole vegan movement, you're just absolute legends. And the work you do just has propelled forward this movement so much. It's given us so much evidence for what animals experience, and it's that there's no refuting what the animals experience when you've got this kind of proof from the slaughterhouses. So thank you for doing the hard work to give us something that we can use to create tangible change for animals.
Thank you. I'm very glad to hear that.
So, Chris, how can people get in contact with you? So, email, what's the website address, all the social media?
The website is farmtransparency.org, and the email is contact@farmtransparency.org. We are on Facebook, Farm Transparency Project, and Instagram, Farm Transparency Project as well. We do have a YouTube channel, which I think is Farm Transparency Project, but I'm not 100% sure. But yeah, you can find all that from our website, farmtransparency.org.
And we'll put all that in our show notes as well, so people can get hold of you or see everything that you're doing. So, Chris, that does bring us to the end of this episode. Well, Puss has decided she's going to leave as well. But I can't thank you enough. As Mackenzie said, you guys are just amazing. And I think every single person in the vegan activist community just bow down to what you've done, because you have done incredible work and opened up so many eyes. So we thank you so much. Thank you for being here with us today. Thank you for giving us your time, and we really appreciate you.
Thanks for having me.
You're welcome.
Well, that brings us to the end of pretty heavy episode, but one that we needed to do, and we thank everybody for watching. So we look forward to seeing you all again in our next episode.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye. Thanks for listening to the Vegan Compass podcast, unveiling truths, inspiring change.
Be sure to follow us on social media @thevegancompass_podcast. See you next time.